This CoinPod is sponsored by America's Card Room, an online gaming service that supports over 60 different cryptocurrencies. CoinPod listeners who create an account with America's Card Room can use the code BTC100, that's BTC100, to redeem a bonus of 100% of the initial amount you deposit to your Card Room account. For more information, visit americascardroom.com and start playing today. Welcome to episode 2 of The CoinPod, a podcast where each week listeners can learn about Bitcoin from Bitcoin. That is, from anyone around the world actively contributing to the development of Bitcoin. On January 25th at the 2008 annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, a distinguished panel shared their opinions and fielded questions on the so-called crypto asset bubble. You can watch a recording of this panel by following the link provided in the show notes, or by simply Googling WE Forum Crypto Asset Bubble. The panelists included Cecilia Skingsley, Deputy Governor of the Swedish Central Bank, venture capitalist Neil Reimer, Yale professor and Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Shiller, and Zhenzu Scott, a Yale alumnus, a fellow at the Aspen Institute, founding partner of Radiant Blockchain Ventures, and a member of the Council of the Future of Blockchain. Today, Jen joins me to further explain some of the opinions she shared on the DeVos panel, which were at times interrupted or cut short by the moderator. Her insights, opinions, and ongoing work are well worth listening to. Here's Jen. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Zach. Great to be here.
To start off, would you mind telling us just a little bit about how you got into Bitcoin, when it first sort of came on your radar, why and how it piqued your interest, and I guess held your interest also?
Sure. I'm actually I got into Bitcoin compared to a lot of other folks probably in your audience a little bit later. When Bitcoin was from 500, the prices started going up. I noticed the momentum. I realized that, perhaps this is not just some one-time, a small invention that probably will disappear over time. And I started to notice, that, the people who got into Bitcoin at that time, some of my friends, some very smart people who got into Bitcoin at that time, really have this very profound belief in it. So I downloaded Satoshi's white paper, and I read the paper. I have applied math, and computer science background. I was blown away, and he, she, they, it, Satoshi is an absolute genius. And also, it's ironic. When I first noticed Bitcoin was because of the price was surging. But after reading the white paper, I realized pricing is, and will be the least important part of Bitcoin, because what Satoshi gifted to the world is really the underlying technology that's going to enable us to establish, peer-to-peer economy, and it really enable, a mass correlation between human beings for collaboration. To establish a system that's mathematically metered instead of human central institutionally metered.
I am curious, and you mentioned it at least once or twice on the panel, that an opinion I share very strongly, that the price is largely or entirely, I guess not entirely, but largely irrelevant to Bitcoin and Bitcoin's blockchain and the continued constant development in the space. And I'm curious to know your opinion on that in a couple different ways. Maybe if you could just explain why you think the price doesn't matter, even though it is what grabs all the headlines and tweets and shares and comments and everything. And it's what draws people to Bitcoin in a way. So a lot of people, and I know it was true for me, are attracted to Bitcoin through the price, and then sort of either they stick to focusing on the price or learn about the technology. Why, in a sense, do you think the price doesn't matter for Bitcoin?
Sure. I think that's a very good question. Like you know, as I mentioned before, I also drawn to Bitcoin because of the price surge in the very beginning. If Bitcoin was simply just a commodity for us to trade, then price would have been the most important part. But because of the capability Bitcoin and Bitcoin blockchain and the philosophy that Satoshi has gifted to us, it's it makes such stunning price surge, the best performing asset ever in human history. If you measure by from beginning of last year to beginning of this year, it just dwarfs compared to what the concept of Bitcoin blockchain could bring to this world. Because especially given the context of how Bitcoin came about, it really came about in the dust and in ashes of 2008 financial crisis. I think the form of the Occupy Wall Street in New York was a physical kind of a protest of how breaking down the financial institutions are. I think Bitcoin is a very intelligent, technological solution to how do we actually solve the problem where, for a really long time, we just, run the society by the very centralized few, never really have the tool to break that model. And I don't, for a second to, have the illusion that because of Bitcoin, because of the, blockchain, the world, how government's going to run, how, financial institutions going to change, because doesn't matter what tools we invented, we ultimately are facing human beings, right? So the nature and the weaknesses of human being always persist. But what Satoshi gave to us is, what Satoshi gave to us is a tool for people have different opinions, actually connect the block based on the protocol, preset the protocol, and based on the mathematical rule preset by the blockchain to allow us to collaborate with each other. And I think that's tremendously powerful. And because of that, I really believe that, even we have witnessed the most stunning pricing surge with Bitcoin, that still, compared to the potential power of, a Bitcoin blockchain and the blockchain itself could bring to this world.
I'm curious to know if the fact that the price doesn't matter is something that you tell people, or the advice you give people who invariably, because we all get this question, who invariably ask, should I buy Bitcoin now? Do you tell them, well, the price doesn't matter, so really whenever is good? Or how do you handle that situation, given that we know and understand the price in the long term doesn't really matter?
So I can share with you, over the course of last year and a half, I have received questions when to buy Bitcoin from the family office's advice to my hairdresser, to my auntie in China, to cousins. And when people like that ask you a question, you have to be very careful. For pricing, for me, might not matter because because of my belief, because where I can see the underlying technology, but not everybody will really looking to Bitcoin from that point of view, or will find that relevant, right? So I think pricing doesn't matter. Is an attitude or is approach for people like myself, perhaps like you and like many of your audience that just really believe the potential power Bitcoin could bring into this world. For mom and pops who are mortgaging their house to buy Bitcoin and 20,000, price absolutely matter, right? And the advice I give to people is that, whatever, doesn't matter how much net worth you have, spend the amount of money that you don't care about it if you lose it at all, right? The key point here is that everybody, before they jump on the, jump on the gun to criticize or endorse Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, they should invest to learn, right? And I think that process is very educational. And I think once you get through that process, doesn't matter if it's $500, $1,000, or whatever amount that you don't concern it if you lose it completely. And I think, go through that process will become one of the most valuable education process, you will receive in terms of understanding what the modern technology potentially could change the world. So I don't encourage people to, remortgage their house and spend so much money getting into cryptocurrency, because it is highly volatile. And, these few days, I'm sure everybody's been watching the curve just coming down. I think, you should invest to learn, not invest to become rich, right? And I think that's the wrong attitude.
Is there a particular, besides, I guess, the white paper, which in my opinion is somewhat consumable, but maybe for others who are interested in Bitcoin, maybe a little bit too technical or over their head. But is there a book or article or blog or author or something that is sort of your go-to recommendation for someone interested in learning more before they buy?
Yeah, I would highly recommend my friend's book I helped to review. My friend Chris Brennick, he used to work for ARK Investment. I met him through Kathy Wood, who I regard as my mentor. Chris Brennick and Jack Tatar co-authored the book Crypto Assets. I think the subtitle is for Innovative Investors. Is the best book you can read right now that prepare you before you get into this madness of cryptocurrency trading. And I think, the book is particularly powerful in the way, I reviewed the book in July last year, and the book came up in October. And when I was reading the book, helped to review the book, I realized, the genius of the book, Jack and Chris managed to do, is using institutional investors' language to articulate something that's fundamentally different, right? And I think that the bridge they have built between the traditional established institutional investors to crypto assets and crypto commodity investment will go down to history as very important milestone of the development of crypto assets. So I highly recommend to read the book.
I have heard of the book actually, and it's next on my reading list. I'm curious though the next thing I guess I want to ask you about is in your interview and sort of the premise of the whole book, Crypto Assets, is trading all of these different coins and tokens and things. But a lot of Bitcoiners and even Ethereum holders take this maximalist viewpoint that their coin is the one and only, and all the rest of these will just fall to the wayside. But according to comments, you're making now, and you made on the panel, you own many different coins, and it seems not a maximalist. Is there a particular reason for why you don't take a maximalist standpoint?
I think the only coin that I have slightly religious view on is probably Bitcoin. There's partially because I'm just fascinated by Satoshi. I think, this individual or this group of people had the wisdom and vision to create this, not only just, has such profound impact, but also had the wisdom to stay anonymous, is really genius, right? And, if you read the white paper from technology point of view, from academic point of view, from writing quality, etc., is really genius. So I'm fascinated by Satoshi. And so the only coin I think I slightly feel a little bit religious because of the mystery of Satoshi. But other than that, I think if you're just taking, each coin as addition to the technology, who is there to say in the 90s that MySpace is going to be owning and the best invention with the internet ever? right? So I think this is a process, it's a journey, it's not the destination. And the more we can be open-minded about different addition into the community, into the asset class, the more we are honest in terms of the pros and cons of the existing crypto assets, I think the far we can go. And I don't think people holding very evangelical views about certain coins or to cryptocurrency itself without recognizing where our weaknesses are is helpful for the longevity and healthy development of the entire space. So for that, I think we all have responsibility to just be very open about where are our shortfalls, where we need to improve, right? And the more we can demonstrate that, the more secure we appear, and the longer we can go.
I 100% agree. I think it's pretty clear to see individuals within Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency space as a whole that sort of lack the open-mindedness you're mentioning. Do you foresee these individuals that sort of bitterly attack other coins? Because some maximalists sort of have more of a neutral view towards other coins and just think theirs is the best. Others are sort of very embittered and have enmity towards other developers. Do you think they pose an obstacle to the advancement of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as a whole, or will they just sort of get left behind and be viewed as just radical crazies as this whole project moves forward?
It's a good question. I think what is going to show is, and what is already showing is the owning and ultimate truth that whatever tools we have been invented as species in the last 10,000 years, they're just tools, and the tools is a mirror of who we are as human being. And I think all those behaviors, it's just a reflection of we all have very different views, and we have very different approaches when we choose to believe in something. I don't think it's necessarily going to be completely different to how we react to many other tools as species we invented in the past 10,000 years. I don't think any of the slightly stronger approach would completely change the course of where the technology is developing, because the biggest incentive and biggest drive of a real quantum shift of any technology is rarely because of anyone's attitude. It's mostly because of where is the economic incentive. And the economic incentive showing in token economy has already been recognized by many companies and many investors and many practitioners in the markets that is not going to go away. So I'm not very concerned about how people are attacking each other. I don't think, personally, I will take the same approach. But at the same time, I also think it just shows we are all human beings. And we have to realize we as principle, how we're going to use the tools we have created. And how we're going to use the tool is the mirror of who we are.
Sure. On the panel, you referenced Bitcoin as a very lousy currency. And you mentioned that Satoshi originally envisioned it to be a payment network, but now, in your opinion, Bitcoin is disrupting gold or sort of acting as a replacement to gold, and it's not a very good currency to use for day-to-day transactions. And curiously enough, on the same day that you participated in that panel, the World Gold Council released a research report, 4 or 5 pages, I believe, and they said the point of the report was to say, no, Bitcoin is not the new gold. They're very different. Cryptocurrency is not going to displace gold, yada, yada. I'm curious to know 2 things, I guess. One, if you think Bitcoin, given scaling technologies like the Lightning Network and others that we don't know yet that may come down the road, if you think Bitcoin ever could work as a payment, if you think Bitcoin working, displacing gold also, what sort of impact that holds for commercial banking as, or even central banking as a potential reserve asset investment to enter sort of this revolution.
So for Bitcoin to become a very efficient payment system, it has to solve at least two problems. One is the scalability in the number of transactions per minute. Right now, it's just simply not enough, right? It's not to say there won't be any addition, technology to solve that problem, but I don't think we're quite there yet. I think Lightning is has great potential, but we probably need some time to prove, how it really, really work, right? I'm very hopeful. Secondly, we need to solve the problem is volatility. If it's a payment, you just simply cannot use, Bitcoin as payment when it's so volatile. A cup of coffee I bought, this morning with Bitcoin with such volatile in the afternoon will cost completely different amount of money. So I think these two things need to solve. I do believe the original intention from Satoshi was to engineer Bitcoin as a payment system. But the reason I think, now more and more I believe that Bitcoin is acting, more like a digital store of value, is because if you think about, how gold became sort of value, was not because, gold was very unique, kind of commodity that only gold could be. Why it was not copper? Why it's not diamond? Right? Why it's not other commodities? It's because people made a choice, right? Believed that was the currency, that was the store of value. And I think Bitcoin absolutely has the potential, and it's starting to behave a little bit like a new digital store of value. A simple question you need to ask is, in Venezuela crisis, on the street, people were not trading gold. People were trading Bitcoin, right? Why is that? In the failed economy, people, in new generation no longer regard gold as a reserve, when their own currency failed, they no longer regard gold as reserve of their value. They use Bitcoin. So of course the Gold Council will denounce that Bitcoin is not gold, right? It's no surprise. Why would they say anything else? But I do think that, Bitcoin absolutely has the potential to even replace 10% of the world gold reserve. It would be much, much more valuable compared to the current price, right? Compared to the price a month ago. And, what does that mean with commercial bank, central bank? I think one potential risk with Bitcoin actually, right now people think when central bank attack Bitcoin, is the worst thing ever happen. I actually think the worst thing could happen to Bitcoin is when central banks started to buy Bitcoin. And then that will become centralized, truly centralized. Because if you look at the gold market, whenever gold price is going up, that's mostly because central banks are buying gold. Whenever gold price is going down, that's mostly because central banks are dumping gold, right? So one of the ways for central banks to really control Bitcoin is just to go to market to buy large amount of Bitcoin and then control the price, right? So I think that's actually a much larger risk than, what they are trying to, deny Bitcoin right now. So in terms of the underlying technology can impact, in terms of commercial bank and central bank, etc. PBOC in China, China's central bank has been talking about to launch its own state-backed blockchain-powered cryptocurrency. And it will be centralized, cryptocurrency, but at the same time, using the same technology invented to decentralize, China could be using, its own cryptocurrency to have perfect capital control. And what it means potentially in theory, each citizen will have a relationship with central bank. So each citizen could, in theory, have a digital wallet with the central bank where you pay your tax, for the central bank to monitor your capital inflow outflow. But at the same time, that will also eliminate, or maybe impose a lot of the questions if there's a direct relationship between citizens and central banks. Why would it need any commercial banks, or why would it need any retail banks, right? And they would not have a balance sheet for them to lend money. So either way, I think what blockchain is bringing to the world is a complete transformation and quite fundamental transformation of how the financial industry is going to be organized.
I appreciate that analysis. I think I tend to agree with some of it. We've had people on the show before who are working with, say, the central bank in Ghana or the central banks in Barbados, urging them to invest in Bitcoin and divest some of their foreign currency reserves. So it's very interesting to hear sort of an opposing opinion to that. But related to banks, I'm curious, because you mentioned also on the panel, one comment you made was to the effect that the people who invest in Bitcoin sort of have a little rebel inside of them and want to opt out of the banking system as we've known it for the past several decades. But given that the banking system is leveraged up to their eyeballs in debt right now, it's just sort of everything's on the precipice of a disaster. If we enter within the next year or two another global financial recession, how do you see that playing out for Bitcoin? Will it either crush Bitcoin because people are struggling to pay for basic necessities, or will it push hordes of people into Bitcoin, or maybe some of both? How do you envision a near-term crisis affecting Bitcoin?
I was quite taken aback by Professor Robert Shiller's comments when he slightly passive-aggressively said, there's Bitcoin attracts certain people, and people who are into Bitcoin's selfish and into for the money. So I wanted to contrast his view. I do think especially people who got into cryptocurrency early on, there is a bit of a rebel in us, right? I think, as I mentioned in the panel, that, no matter what happened, that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency start to make people to question what is money, where the money should come from. Should my money just depreciate? Should I allow the institution issue the money I'm receiving, at the same time borrow enormous amount of the debt? And should we just obeying the government when the centralized financial institution who irresponsibly manipulated the market and made enormous amount of money and then enormous amount of loss? And we as taxpayers should pay, use our tax money to bail out the bank CEOs. So I think all of these discussions are very healthy, and it's necessary. And that's why I think, there's a bit of a rebel in, especially people got into crypto early on. Secondly, in terms of financial recession, I think, the more the mainstream financial system seems failing, the more valuable people will realize how cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, is. Because to me, one of the reasons I'm holding Bitcoins is also because I want the asset that's completely uncorrelated with the central bank's policy and the mainstream economy. So in this way, it's a diversification, for my entire portfolio. But also it's a protection from the failure from the policymakers, right? So, I assume you're American. In America, the dollar you receive, the institution, your government issuing a dollar, they also have, 200 trillion debt, with against your entire economy, right? So for people who argue, what is, this is coming back to Professor Robert Shiller. He wrote in an article saying that Bitcoin is not based on solid economic model. And I want to ask, if is US dollar based on solid economic model? And so, the point is that perhaps the world economy facing a lot of challenges, but the more challenges there is, the more people will realize the need to diversify themselves against the economy that's controlled by central banks and policymakers. Before Bitcoin, we didn't really have such kind of instrument. Now we do. So I think it's what Satoshi brought to us is one of the greatest inventions so far in this century.
I definitely agree with that last comment. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I for one, and I know our listeners share the opinion that I'm definitely glad to hear your opinion somewhat more fully explained, given the sort of restrictive moderation of the panel. If you don't mind, I sort of want to close with two quick questions. I'm just curious to know if there's a development or even a particular project that's in process right now within the cryptocurrency space that you're most looking forward to following or seeing come to fruition, and also what your primary or principal concern about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general is moving forward.
Sure. Your first question, I think, because I'm also a council member of the Future of Blockchain Council in World Economic Forum, and I have seen quite fairly how the international media and the general public and governments very concerned about what's happening in the crypto speculation, right, and what damages and misleading effect, and also damage doing to a lot of retail investors. And I absolutely agree. There has to be something to be done, right? But at the same time, I also feel a little bit disappointed by the media because, in fact, I had a private briefing in Davos to the media executives, basically, share with them what's wrong with the coverage with, from the media in terms of cryptocurrency. I think there's so much focus on pricing that's really generating too much interesting speculation. That's part of I think media is part of the problem. So part of what I try to do is I want to lead by example and demonstrate what blockchain could make a difference to fight more meaningful causes such as climate change. So with my company, Radiant Blockchain Ventures, we are using token economy to transform renewable energy and carbon credit trading. And we just launched radiantcarbon.io. So essentially, we are generating carbon credit through distributing free high-efficiency cooking stoves and clean water filter to the poorest households in Rwanda. And using that, UNFCCC certify our project and give us carbon credit, and we sell the carbon credit to European organizations and companies. And this kind of traditionally bilateral illiquid trade, we use Ethereum blockchain to tokenize the interest of future cash flow, and using that to make this kind of bilateral trade and illiquid to completely liquid and multilateral, and bring more people to be part of the solution using blockchain to fight climate change while helping people in the absolute bottom. So we will have many more projects coming up in terms of in the solar space, in the green tech IoT space, using blockchain. And I want to be part of the answer and solution to demonstrate what the media focus is totally wrong. It's not always about pricing. It's not what Professor Shiller talked about we are just into for selfish reason. We actually using blockchain to bring more people to be part of the solution to fighting some of the biggest problems in the world. And I don't see why that's not a positive force for our world.
I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk with me tonight. Our listeners can find a link to a video recording of the panel that Jen was on in the show notes to this episode. Jen, before we sign off, would you mind telling our listeners where they can follow you and stay up to date with your commentary on Bitcoin and blockchain, as well as the work that you're in the middle of right now?
Sure. Thank you so much, Zach. The easiest way is to follow me on Twitter. I'm at JenZhuScott. So JenZhuScott. The project we are working on is radiancarbon.io. So radiancarbon.io. And we would love to get the community support. Thank you so much, Zach.
Oh, absolutely. No, thank you. This CoinPod has been a production of You, Me, and BTC. Special thanks to Tim Baker and Daniel Brown, and to our guest, JenZhuScott. Keep up with weekly episodes by following the CoinPod on Twitter @thecoinpod, and visit thecoinpod.com to learn more about the show. We'll be back next week. Until then, cheers.